The Sumerians have been a catalyst for the world in terms of the power of ancient civilizations. Experts have been making astounding discoveries that have shown there could be the existence of ancient civilizations before the Sumerians built their empire, just like the likes of Göbekli Tepe or Mohenjo-Daro. However, to the power and validity of the presence and knowledge of gods or fallen angels, the Sumerians may hold this knowledge. Looking at the numerical accuracy of who the Anunnaki were, the uncanny match of the fallen angels in the Book of Enoch rings true with there being 7 fallen angels, just like 7 Anunnaki. Names, location, and story can change, but the impact and purpose unequivocally proves the Sumerians and Anunnaki were the fallen angels. From exact depictions and exact purpose in human interaction, researchers and experts continue to find evidence that the 7 Anunnaki arrived not by chance, but by purpose. Ancient societies have built upon their own interpretation of creation stories. All ancient societies have their own idea of what happened that brought their existence and the world to where it is today. However, no other society has had a more connected and universal creation story than the Sumerians and the Anunnaki. What we will be diving into today is a journey in examining how the Anunnaki came to be and how they connect as the fallen angels of the Abrahamic religions. The first connections that many do not realize is that Abraham himself was a Sumerian. Knowledge of who the Anunnaki were and their impact would be immediate. From here, we see the connection with the intended betterment of humans, just as the fallen angels wanted it to be. From this connection, we can begin to see how the story and impact the Anunnaki and fallen angels had, bringing these stories into one. Coming from an influential family to where his grandfather, Terah, was an influential priest in the Sumerian court, this connection already places Abraham with influential knowledge of the Anunnaki and who they exactly were. Here is where interpretation changes by way of location. In biblical terms, fallen angels were just namely angels who have rebelled against God, whereas the Anunnaki take a more complex turn with being beings who already have established themselves. They come in with an intelligence and purpose of fulfillment of what they wanted from the human race. Just as Abraham's God represented his people or followers, the Anunnaki were represented just as Abraham's God represented his people or followers. The Anunnaki represented the gods of the Sumerians, Assyrians, Babylonians, and Akkadians. What is important to remember is just as the fallen angels, who made their impact on earth, the same is said with how the Anunnaki made theirs. Numerically speaking, it is important to focus. The Anunnaki were made up of 7 deities who judged humans. The fallen angels interpretation also brings a list of 7 important angels who show before God, just as there are 7 levels of heaven. The importance of the number 7 is that just like the Sumerians, the Anunnaki were also a 7. It is important to focus on the numerical similarities here. The Anunnaki were made up of 7 deities who judged humans, just as the fallen angels were made up of 7 who also wanted to make an impact on humans. Just as they were made up of 7 equally, it is important to remember that just because names change, which is important, it needs to be remembered that it does not mean the beings or individuals change as well. An important excerpt needs to be included here about the similar stories with the same outcome, players and meeting, but due to region and language, names and locations happen to change. However, this does not change the truth behind it and those involved, and this also brings in the Great Flood story. The next most intriguing flood story comes from the Epic Gilgamesh, which comes from the ancient Sumerians. Aside from the Abrahamic narrative, which I use the term Abrahamic to incorporate all of the religions falling under this umbrella, the Sumerian flood narrative is considered the first written account. Academia have already stated that the Sumerians were the first to establish writing, and within their writing, they have wrote about the flood story. This is why interpretation and understanding history plays a big role as to why ancient civilization stories need to be more put to fact and not anything else. If the Sumerians came first, this places their flood story between 2150 and 1400 BCE, in which Noah's falls at 1600 BCE. The Sumerian flood story occurring in the dates that it has brings Noah's flood story within the same realm, and since both stories fall in the same timeline, it only improves the accuracy of this actually happening. From this interpretation, a domino effect is put due to the Sumerians providing their story, which in turn influenced the ancient Egyptian flood story, which is called the Book of the Heavenly Crow. What should be understood from these accounts is not to discount one because another predates it, but to take it as confirmation that such an event can actually occur. Ancient societies provide us with knowledge and interpretation of what is important to them. When we are examining the connections, what this shows is how important it is to understand how translations and locations impact our own understanding of these stories. Being raised from children to adulthood, we are able to develop our own interpretations, which teach us more. As we expand our minds, we are able to learn of such stories of the Sumerians and how these connections can be made to Abrahamic religions and who exactly they were. Just as the fallen angels sing songs of praises to God, the Anunnaki sing praises to Enki, who is their single God. What is to be understood that none of this information provided here is about the disproof or non-existence of God. What this shows is how both have stories of beings who actually could be followers of God. What is exciting from such a premise is the linkage between the Anunnaki and the fallen angels in bringing such connections. The interesting understandings of this brings us to the viewpoints that the Anunnaki are a group of individuals or beings who set out from somewhere and end up in Earth. The fallen angels were a group of individuals who set out from a location and ended up on Earth. This is what has fueled ancient alien theorists and other theorists on the origination of the Anunnaki. But what is most fascinating from all of this is how the Anunnaki made such an impact, just like the fallen angels did. What we should keep in mind is that the Anunnaki arrived from a planet and the fallen angels fell from heaven, but the interpretation is that they still arrived. The location of where they came from, we do not know, but what we do know is that such beings arrived to Earth and impacted the humans in the same exact way. What we can infer from the records of the Anunnaki and the fallen angels is that they saw humans as a possibility to experiment with. They saw a group of individuals who were at a unique stage in terms of intelligence and beauty that had developed an attraction to intermix with and nurture. All in all, we were given magnificent stories and leftover structures, breadcrumbs, and connections that have allowed us a glimpse into a world we have only just begun to unravel.